Money plays an important role in our lives, but how do we think biblically about money? So today we are happy to have Mrs. Manju George, a chartered accountant. She's also a partner in charge of a national level of chartered accountants based in Bangalore. She's a speaker at conferences and author of the book on biblical perspectives of money and management. She also supports her husband who help people with underprivileged communities, and she's also a mother of two young adults. Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Manju. My first question would be, what does the Bible say about money?
Lynette, it's so interesting that the Bible has more than 2,300 verses about money, and Jesus himself talked so much about money and wealth, possessions. In fact, it said that he spoke more about money, wealth, possessions than he did about hell, heaven and hell combined. And in fact, even the parables, if you take out of I think about 60, majority of the parables were also concerning things with money. So if you're talking about what does the Bible say about money, I think one of the first things which is so important is that it says that it competes with God in our lives. Money competes with God in our lives because the Bible tells us that you can't serve both God and mammon. Either you love one and you hate the other. So you can't do it with both together. So the security, as a human being, I believe we all need an identity, we need security, we need provisions, some of our basic requirements. And money seems to offer to us identity, security, provision. Whereas as people who follow Christ, the Bible is very clear that it is Christ who is our identity and our security and our provider. So it kind of competes, and so we need to be very watchful of that. The other thing I would say is there is some connection between eternity and the way you handle our finances. I'm not able to point my finger at it, but the Bible tells us that if we are not faithful with worldly riches, who will entrust to us eternal riches, And in fact, Billy Graham himself said, if you are faithful in matters concerning money, it's likely that you are doing well in every other area of life. So there is a connection there, it seems to be. The other thing is God does speak about blessings, and that comes with material blessings. In Deuteronomy 28, where you have all those about, the blessings to people who obey God, there is so much about blessing your, you're coming in, you're going out, your crops, your livestock, etc. So there is blessing. However, I believe it's a tool that God has constantly used to draw people back to Him, to discipline people. So if you look at the Old Testament, if you look at how the Israelites have constantly had blessings as well as problems with their finances because when they turn away from God. And if you take particularly the book of Haggai, where they come back to build the temple, and they get busy building for themselves, and God says, I blew away whatever you brought in because you were busy building your own houses, and while my house was lying in ruins. So I believe it's a tool that God uses because it's something that's so close to our heart, and there is nothing. In fact, Ecclesiastes says that money is the answer to everything. And there is nothing we can do, whether it's our own lives, our families, our churches, our ministries, nothing without money. So we need money probably just as much as we need God. And that's where you have this whole competition, and we need to know where we keep our hearts in it. I hope that answers you.
Yeah, yes, Manju, thank you. Since you're speaking about money, how do we as Christians called to be good stewards of the money that we have? How would it look in practice?
In practice, I think that's a great question, because all of us in church, I particularly feel in India, we hear a lot about stewardship, we hear all these principles, but then when we leave church, we have no idea how to actually apply it into our lives. And application of that stewardship principle in money is very important. And I would look at it in two ways. And the first thing, to really believe that we are a steward. Most people don't have in the church, don't have an argument when you say, and don't disagree when you say that you are only a steward, God, everything belongs to God and all of that stuff. But the question is, if you ask, go deeper down and see, how do you then manage your money? If you really believe, is it just the 10% that belongs to God, or is it the 100%? And if it's the 100%, the question is, how are you using your 100% of the money, right? So I believe the first thing for practical application is to really believe that I am only a steward, that God is the owner of this money that I have with me, and I can only use it the way He wants me to use it. So if once you've believed that, and then you know that whatever I do with the money, I have to do it the way the owner wants me to do it, right? So coming into practicality, what happens? Yes, we know that it is God who owns everything, but you have this money in your hand and you don't know what to do with it, you don't know how to use it, and somewhere at the back of the mind we also think maybe God's not happy with this particular expense that I have, but we still go ahead and do it, right? So to get God involved in your entire finance management and be able to manage it is, I believe, the second step. And there is no other way but to plan, for sure, to plan, to account, to track. Yes, you could do it the way what's comfortable for you, but I think it has to be done. So many people say, by the 20th they say, oh, I don't know what happened to my money, it's just gone. I don't think that's an answer, and that's one of the reasons why we are not able to be good stewards, because we are not taking care of them, not tracking them, not planning, not budgeting. Do it to what's comfortable, because most people think, I don't have a calling, I'm not a finance person, but then yet everybody has money, and I believe that if we have the money, God has given us the ability to be able to manage it. So practically, to be able to spend within your means, I believe, is just one key underlining there. Live within your means, spend as much as God has given you. And I think I would define money as a tool that God has given to fulfill His purposes in our life. So He has given us just enough to fulfill His purposes. Now, what are His purposes? If you talk about it biblically, it does include my food, clothing, etc. It does take care of my family. It includes paying taxes. It includes saving for an expense into the future. It includes giving, right? It includes all of these things are included, and that's where my 100% is. And so we need to be, if you're able to practically say that, how do I manage every bit of every aspect of this, and put your mind to it, I believe it is possible to do it. Yeah, so that would be practically applying it, Lynette.
You said that money belongs to God, and you also written a book, Enjoy Money God's Way.
Right.
But there are in some circles who say, wealth is dangerous to our faith, while others would say financial blessing is a result of our faith in God. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's great. So, yes, I've written a book called Enjoy Money, and I use the word enjoy, taking it from 1 Timothy, where Paul says, don't put your hope in your wealth, but put your hope in God, who richly provides everything you need for your enjoyment, right? So, when we hear enjoyment, we think of all the worldly, fleshy things that we want to do, and we are like, oh, does God really care about these things? But I believe the enjoyment is in using the money the way He wants us to use it, the 100%. So I asked this question: do you feel excited about paying your taxes? And of course, all the time the answer is no. But if you're saying, I'm doing it because God has asked me to, and I'm obeying God, I believe the whole approach changes. So coming back to this question of being pious, poverty, etc., kind of a mindset where you think that I would be more righteous, I believe there is a more deeper spiritual issue there in both these extremes, where you're saying, okay, is it being sacrificial and living a poor kind of a minimalistic kind of life, versus living that God blesses me because I'm good and good to Him. I feel both of them are misplaced priorities on money, and this equation of of God, me and money is something that we all of us need to work out on where does money, what's my relationship with money, what's my relationship with God. And the minute we change our focus from God to money, I believe there's a problem. And that can happen even with people who live a pious life, because they think they're adding to their righteousness, right? I mean, you can't add anything to your righteousness by just living a sacrificial life. And to those people who say, I must live, if you're giving off all your money, I agree. If you're giving to the poor, needy, that's a different lot. But my question is, what are you doing? Are you wasting your opportunities because you're saying, oh, if I make more money, then, I might go into sin? Or are you wasting your opportunities because, which again is not a godly principle? Or are you just spending your money? Because if you have your money and you say, okay, I'm not going to save it because then I will become, rich and power. I mean, I'll become proud of the money that I have. Then you're spending it on yourself. So then there's a problem there. Coming to blessings, the Bible doesn't say I will bless you with poverty. I have not seen it anywhere. Blessings are always with prosperity. And if you see, even in Genesis, God says, go multiply, prosper, increase. That's the godly principle. But the problem is when we put our heart on that increase, when we depend on that instead of remembering that God is the one who's my provider. God is the one I need to put my heart on. So it's really a heart issue there. And so that relationship with God, money, and ourselves, if we figure that out and keep it in the right place, we can put money in its position. Because you remember we said it competes. So it's true, there is a great tendency for us to go away, but we need to be able to put that in place. And with God, we can do it.
There is a tendency to pursue money and worship money instead of God. So how do we make sure that we don't fall into that? We don't fall into greed and materialism. What would you suggest for that? How do we prevent ourselves from going there?
Right. So we pursue and we do our best to make all the money we can. We should. I believe if you don't, then you're wasting the opportunities that God has given us, and that's probably another level of stewardship, right? Those are opportunities, and that's the way that's just the way God works as well, right? He does everything with excellence. So if we work and pursue to make as much money as we can, yes, it is possible that we can fall into greed, but we need to be again putting our things in place. And I believe contentment is the answer. Now, contentment, not because I want to feel content, but I believe if you take Hebrews, talks about, Paul says, I am content because I know that God will never leave me nor forsake me. So it comes from an assurance that God will never leave me nor forsake me. So if I am going to be working hard to make the money that I have, and at the same time believing that it's God who's my provider, that's one big step. Secondly, I believe that giving away is a great way to ensure that you don't fall into greed. As you give, the Bible says, sow generously and reap generously. You will be made rich in every way so that you can be generous in every occasion. And I believe very strongly that giving away helps you to break the hold that money has on you. So as you do your best, it doesn't mean, you can live, I believe you need to sort out with God, okay, what's my lifestyle? What's the lifestyle I want to maintain? It doesn't depend on how much money I have. It depends on what I have decided with God in me. How much do I want to give? How much do I want to, do with other things that I need to do? So if I'm getting into that state of greed, I would say give as much as you can. I think that's a great place to give. And if you continue reading in Corinthians, where talking about generosity, it's like a cycle. It's beautiful, where he says that as you give, the people who receive those generous givings pray for you and give thanks to God. And then what do? Then they give again. So it's a beautiful community that is formed when you start, giving away. Make as much as you can. Give as much as you can. I think that's a great way to practice it.
That's nice about the importance of giving and how useful that is, especially it is the beauty of the church and the community at large. They're getting blessed by the finances we receive. So how can we systematically give to others? How can we be a blessing to the church, the community, and how can we make a difference to them?
Okay, so I mentioned about plan, right? I would say the way we do it in my family, we make a plan for the year, and there we decide on our giving. In fact, we have a way of increasing our giving every year. So even the Bible says, give what you have decided in your heart to give, which means it's a pre-planned thing. Of course, you need to suddenly give something, somebody comes up with a need, that's a different matter. But you need to be intentional about it, right? And be willing to include that in your giving. But what really hinders our giving is most of the time, again, a matter of the heart, because we think, oh, but you have no idea how much of needs I have. We keep thinking that my needs are so much more, so I don't have enough to save, I don't have, enough to give, and I get into this whole cycle of debt. And I believe debt is the killer. And if we get into this habit of taking debt because I believe I don't have enough, because I believe that God hasn't given me enough to meet my needs, I think that is why people get into this financial problems and not able to give. I know your question was about how do I give and yet take care of all my needs, right? So to be able to say that I am going to be intentional about giving and just give, I believe there is a supernatural thing that happens there because God steps in. I love that verse in Philippians 4, which we quote extensively. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it's surprising that it's in the context of the money that I have that Paul says that, because he says, I have learned to live, I've learned to be content if I have plenty, if I'm in want, if I'm in need or not. I've had enough and I don't have enough. In all those circumstances, I have learned to be content because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's what he says. So if we are intentional, if you are in a debt situation, and there's always a coming back to Jesus and say, I'm sorry, I've messed up, right? And I've seen so many stories of people who come back and say, we've messed up, we've come back to God, and we've been able to settle all our debts. We've been able to manage our money well now. We've been able to give because we want to give in our hearts. We are people who want to give, but we feel bad that we can't give because the needs that we have back home just kind of pull us away from the giving that we want to do. So, if we bring it all and, bring our plans there to God, and we see that, we will really enjoy, because the solution is not more money. The solution is to be able to manage and live within what you have and put our trust in God, and we find our peace and contentment. I think all of us are after that. So we'll be able to give, we'll be able to do everything we are called to do.
Thank you so much, Manju, for those valuable insights. I'm sure that will be a blessing even as we think biblically about money and practicing how do we live, how do we be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. So thank you so much, Manju, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah.